So what happens when a conflict just spirals completely out of control, when a global superpower seems to be caught totally on the back foot? Well, that's the story of the US-Iran war. And according to the analysis we're breaking down today, it's a story filled with shifting reasons, some really shocking miscalculations, and frankly, a complete lack of a winning strategy.
I mean, how does this actually happen? How does a war that you've got to assume was planned for months just turn into a chaotic mess in a matter of days? The analysis we're looking at suggests this wasn't just some misstep, it was a trap. A superpower literally walked into a conflict thinking it would be a quick victory, and instead found itself sinking deeper and deeper into a quagmire.
And the immediate fallout? It's been absolutely devastating. We're talking carpet bombing over Tehran, retaliatory missile strikes lighting up the Middle East. U.S. embassies are actually shutting down, telling their own citizens that they are on their own. The human and economic cost is already staggering. And listen, this is just the beginning.
Okay, so to really understand how we got here, we have to start with the most basic question of all. Why is this war even happening? You'd think for a conflict of this scale, there'd be a pretty clear answer. But what's so revealing in the source material is that the official reason, well, it seems to be built on shifting sand.
Back in the U.S., the whole rationale is already falling apart. You've got members of the U.S. Congress openly calling the administration's reasons a sham, saying they were lied to. And this isn't just, the opposition party. This is a fundamental breakdown of trust at the highest levels of government. And here's exactly why that trust is breaking down. The whole objective of the war has been a moving target from day one. First, it was all about destroying Iran's nuclear program. Then, it suddenly shifted to regime change. After that, it was about degrading missile capacity. Then protecting neighbors. And most recently, it's a preemptive strike. This isn't a strategy. It's just a frantic search for a justification that sticks.
And that leads us to what is maybe the most explosive claim in this entire analysis, that this war wasn't even America's to begin with. So, if that's true, who or what pushed the U.S. into this?
The analysis points directly to this jaw-dropping admission from a U.S. official. The reason for a preemptive war? Apparently, the U.S. knew that Israel was about to take action, so the stated logic was to strike Iran first, before an Israeli attack could trigger an Iranian retaliation against American forces in the region. And you can bet Iran seized on that narrative immediately. Their foreign minister framed this as a proxy war, a war of choice fought by America for Israel. This just pours gasoline on the fire of a counter-narrative that says America's foreign policy is being dictated by another nation's interests. But the political damage isn't just international. The source points out a deep fracture within the president's own political base. Staunch former supporters are now out there publicly calling the administration a bunch of sick liars, feeling totally betrayed by a president who promised America first and an end to all the stupid wars. And the numbers? Well, they back this up completely. Public support is cratering. A CNN poll finds a whopping 60% of Americans disapprove of the attack on Iran, with approval sitting at a dangerously low 30% according to Reuters. This isn't just an unpopular war anymore. It's quickly becoming a full-blown presidential crisis. So let's set aside the why for just a minute and talk about the how. I mean, you would assume the world's most powerful military would execute a war with flawless precision, right? But the analysis we're digging into reveals something else entirely. A campaign just plagued by shocking and incredibly costly miscalculations. See, the core assumption was this would be a quick, surgical strike, a 4 or 5 day operation, in and out, job done. But the reality on the ground? It's a brutal, grinding war of attrition that the U.S. military was, according to this analysis, completely and totally unprepared for. And think about this, $1.5 billion were spent on the military buildup before a single shot was even fired. That is a staggering investment in positioning aircraft carriers, naval vessels, and air power for an operation that is already flying completely off the rails. And at the heart of this struggle is just some really bad math. The U.S. and its allies are firing these incredibly expensive interceptor missiles, like Patriots, to shoot down a ton of relatively cheap Iranian ballistic missiles. It is a completely unsustainable economic equation. You just can't win a war when your defensive bullets cost 1,000 times more than the enemy's offensive ones. And that problem is on a very, very short fuse. Projections show that Qatar will run out of interceptors in just 4 days, the UAE in about a week. Meanwhile, Iran claims it has enough missiles to keep this up for months. They're basically saying they're just warming up. Now, this conflict isn't happening in some bubble. The miscalculations in Washington and the fighting in the Middle East are sending massive shockwaves across the entire global economy.
The epicenter of these shockwaves is this narrow little strip of water, the Strait of Hormuz. You got to think of it as the world's oil tap. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard has just slammed its hand down on it, threatening to set fire to any ship that even tries to pass through.
21 million barrels of oil. That is how much the global economy depends on passing through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. And that flow has now been choked off. The tap has literally been turned off. The effect was instantaneous. Oil prices have already shot up to $80 a barrel. But analysts are warning that this is just the beginning. The price could easily spike to $120, maybe even $150 a barrel, which would almost certainly trigger a worldwide recession. And it's not just oil. Europe is already watching natural gas prices jump by more than 50%. For major importers like India, it's a double blow, hitting both their crude oil and their natural gas supplies. That threatens massive inflation and huge economic instability.
So this all brings us to the final, and maybe the most important part of the analysis. You've got a murky justification, a faltering military campaign, a global economic crisis brewing. How on earth does this end?
And here is the strategic trap. Iran's military command structure has been deliberately decentralized. There is no single person you can call to get a ceasefire. So the US is left with two pretty much impossible options. One, engage in a long, bloody, and incredibly expensive air campaign to hunt down every last missile launcher. Or two, in a truly absurd situation, ask your enemy to please form a committee so you can negotiate a surrender. It's a complete dead end. But beyond the strategic trap, there's a psychological one. The analysis poses this critical question from Iran's point of view. Why would a nation that feels devastated, wounded, and insulted ever agree to negotiate? As long as it can still inflict pain, it has zero reason to talk. It has nothing left to lose. And that leaves us with this final, sobering thought. From destroying a nuclear program, to regime change, to a preemptive strike, the objective was never clear. And if you don't even know what winning looks like, how do you know when the war is over? That's the question the entire world is now asking.